this meeting to order. Has anyone signed up for public comment?
We haven't had a chance to circulate the sign-in book, but is there anyone here who would like to make public comment?
During the commissioners meeting, is there a way that Mr. Holland can speak? Because I know officially he's not supposed to, but if he has something to add, you know, because he has a little more expertise, you know, he's handling money. Is there any way we can do that or not really?
Not in our public, not in the way it's structured now. We can always change the structure.
Step it up, Judge.
Fine, huh?
I got things to do.
Anybody else have anything for public comment? All right, we have no old business. New business. New business, the purpose of this work session, as we call it today, I guess it's a regular salary board meeting, is to discuss how or when or if we're going to implement the salary study that we paid for. And I think that's the main purpose of this meeting this morning. I don't anticipate any action coming out of this meeting as far as new business goes, but we need to make a decision on how we're going to implement this study. So I'm going to turn it over to Amy, since she and Kim and Lori are the ones that did the salary study.
As you know, there's been a small group of Kim and Lori and I who have been working with the consultant facilitating the results that you've seen of the salary study thus far. And at this point, we're looking for direction on how and whether, as Mr. Greer said, you want to implement this, whether this is going to be the policy of the county, and if so, what policies need to be implemented so that we can administer it. So we felt that it would be the next step to get at least the core group of the salary board together to start discussing this kind of philosophy.
Okay.
Well, I just want to start by saying that I think that this salary study gives us a starting block. One of the first things that I think we need to discuss is how we go about implementing it, how we index that that pay scale, where we start people at the pay scale. If we start them out at the minimum, somebody with experience, how do we compensate them above one of the requirements? You know, is it, such as yesterday, is it more than 5 years experience? It's $1 above the minimum. More than 10, $2. There's got to be, I think, we've got to some way, you know, quantify and qualify all of this information. And if we're going to use it, we've got to, you know, kind of inspect it or get a tune-up every so many years to make sure we're in line. Now, one of the things that I've made very clear since I got here, and I came in at, I would say, a very precarious time with the salary board, but there is a cost of living adjustment and then what I would consider a true raise. Just because you give a 3% raise doesn't mean it's necessarily need to index the salary ranges accordingly. That could be tied to an index, whether that's the Social Security COLA, the Consumer Price Index for Western Pennsylvania or Pittsburgh. Just because you give a raise above and beyond that doesn't mean you necessarily need to increase the minimum and the maximum accordingly. And I think we also need to set a policy whereas if somebody reaches the maximum, which is quite possible, how do we handle that?
Well, first of all, let's back up. In Butler County, we've usually always tied, and of course this study is only for non-union employees. We've always tried to tie non-union employees to union employees. Whatever the union contract was, it turned out to be that's what we gave non-union employees also. And this was pretty much the rule until last year. We gave non-union employees 2%, while the union got 3, some of the union members got 4. This year we gave them 3%. And I think this is one of the big considerations we have to look at. Is it fair to have people, just because they're not in the union, not being treated equally. And if we implement this salary study, and the study doesn't correlate to whatever the next union negotiation comes out to, are we going to be treating our employees fairly, or just because they don't belong to a union? And if I were a non-union employee and not being treated the same as the union employees, I'd look at organizing a union for the ones that aren't in the union. So these are things we have to consider.
Oh, I have a comment to that. I was in the non-union part for all my life. I never had one person, I went up to their house and they said, I don't believe you're charging the union rate. I think I'd like to give you 50% more and have me be equal to the union. Nobody did that. Nobody's going to do that. Okay.
That's an entirely different thing.
Oh, well, wait a minute, I have the floor, okay?
No, I have the floor. You were done, and I'm talking now. I'm responding
When
to
was
your
I
comment.
done?
You stopped, and I started replying to your
Okay, well,
comment.
let's put something in there, Bill, because I wasn't done, okay?
All right,
I
go ahead.
paused,
If you're going to
okay?
deteriorate this meeting to shouting match, go ahead. Go
Well-
ahead, Jim.
Bill,
Jim,
do
we
you have a
want,
burr under your saddle today? Okay,
we want to keep this,
Yeah.
we want to keep this meeting in relationship to what we're talking about here at the county. What you did in your private business has no correlation. If I was a homeowner, naturally I would try and get somebody to do the job at the best price. This has nothing to do with that, what you're talking about.
no, can I say this?
Sure.
I got elected here to make parity between the private sector and public sector. If you didn't, and you want to have the public sector here, this is where we're going. The sky is no limit. Okay, if you want to do that, I didn't get elected for that, so that's just opinion, okay?
Hey, let's get to this, man.
Yeah, let's get to what we're
Bottom line
talking about
is,
here.
is, I think
Just
we've
a
all,
minute.
I'm sorry.
Jim, we all got elected for the same thing, to serve the taxpayers of Butler County. And what we're talking about now is what's fair for all of our employees. Okay. Ben?
Well, I think I think there's some consensus that we were afraid that people were coming in at the same rate as somebody leaving. So,
That's one of the things we have.
so, it's one of the things that I was talking with Lori about. It's easy to say, well, we start at the minimum and then we justify, an increase from there. So is that the policy we have? And then, what's the structure in place to compensate somebody when we do need to get somebody with experience? Because as you said, this is non-management. I was talking with Dale yesterday, and there's going to be some departments that need people with more experience. So it's not going to be very easy to start somebody at the bottom. But what's a criteria? This is all about establishing some type of policy. Do we assume that they automatically start at the minimum and then, we have some kind of criteria in place?
I think you hit right on it, Ben. We have to decide where we're going to start new employees. Are we going to start with the minimum and then salary study? And then are we going to gradually increase them as merit raises? Or as cost of living raises, as you pointed out earlier?
Well, I was talking more with the scale, as far as like how do we index the scale so that this protects having a salary study like this in place protects the county from liability. This is why major corporations are doing it, because it's equal pay for equal work. So as long as somebody's within the minimum and the maximum, if I don't want to say completely protects, but certainly guards us against the litigation better than not having anything. So, do we tie this index to, like you said historically, the CPI in Pittsburgh? Regardless of, because one of the things that Jim had mentioned is he said, we took the salary study based on 2013 data, and we increased it by 3%. Whereas, I was one of the people who voted for the 3% raise, but that doesn't mean that I necessarily think that the index should increase by 3%.
So do we start new employees with no experience at the minimum and then salary study? I think that's one of the first things we have to talk about.
Can I reframe that just a little bit?
Yes.
Starting new employees who have the requirements
Basic
of
requirements.
the job description
Right,
for that
right.
position. They may have experience if the job description requires it, but they meet the minimum requirements that would be the minimum. Does that fair?
Well,
statement?
that's one of the things we have to decide today, that if we're hiring an employee down in Children and Youth, and they're just out of college, and they meet the minimum requirements for that position, do they start at the minimum salary? And then how do we adjust it if they're coming from, say, another county where they have 10 years' experience?
And we've looked at some of the other counties that have policies in place for salary ranges like this. And so there's a variety of things you can choose. I believe it's Franklin County, for example. They have a policy where, particularly when you're hiring people in higher management positions, that the person who meets the minimum requirements of that job starts at the minimum. But if they have increased experience or education on top of that, they have a policy in place where the salary could increase, I believe it's up to 30% on top of the minimum, to give you flexibility to hire someone at a little higher rate because their qualifications merit it. That might be
And in some
something
of
you
these
want to direct us
positions-
to develop as a policy.
In some of these positions, that's going to be necessary, like you said, Amy. But to have some kind of policy, maybe somebody says, you know what, I just need somebody with the basic requirements, and I can get somebody in here at the starting rate. Sometimes that's not going to always be applicable, and you're going to need to hire somebody above that with the necessary experience. But that's where the policy has to come into place. Is it the dollar figure of the starting, is it like $1 above, $2 above based upon experience, or is it a percentage based? At 10%, 20%, 30% above? That's the kind of policy we need to get in place. And is it 5 years of applicable experience, 10 years, 15? What are the different buckets?
But,
Go ahead.
oh, okay. A lot of this is almost, look, it's market driven. If you go to get Steve Bites asking, work 23 years in the private sector, doing the exact same thing he does now, how can you even quantify that except on an individual basis? I mean, it's almost on a ridiculous side. He took a pay cut to even get him over, over the midpoint. I mean, that is not, if you have these specialty jobs, there are accountants in Ben's office. Accountants or RNs, it's not even market driven. It doesn't, if you're gonna fill, the summary's gonna fill that position. You've got some jobs that are market driven. I mean, you can sit here, we have to make good judgments on what to give people. Okay?
That's exactly right, and we have to have the starting point. And this starting point, if we look at the salary study, the minimum salaries on there were the minimums that some of the other counties were paying. So they were market driven to a certain extent. However, in the case of somebody like Steve, he had all kinds of experience, and you don't start him at the dollar. That's what we're saying. You can't start somebody with experience and maybe an extra degree or a master's degree, if not required, we can't start them at that minimum. But the minimum can be the starting point, though.
And currently, you have a structure that a rate is set by salary board. And if the person who's currently in that position, say retiring, has increased over time to a rate that is higher than what market might be for a person you bring in at a lower experience level, you're constrained right now to either pay the person that amount or to come back to salary to change that rate, salary to change that rate. That's, I think, one of the challenges of our current structure that you could address with the salary study.
Another issue in the salary study, which does not address, are regions. A person in a county next to Philadelphia is going to expect more pay than somebody in Williamsport, Lycoming County, because of the region. So are we going to adjust it for that? It's just, and that's part of the market. Market driven. The market is not the same in every area in Pennsylvania.
Well, Amy came up with a good point there. I have, the row officers, if they want to, the person could be at the limit, and they can hire the new person to do whatever they want. They quote some number, it says, oh, I have section 9053, and I'm gonna do whatever I want. I mean, and they do it. They hire them, the person's sitting right or over the max. We have one person that's over the max, they hire him and go, can't touch me. It's just almost on the ridiculous side, with this.
Well, there's a point there. If the row officers don't cooperate, then we have limited authority over row officers. I mean, we can establish salaries for their employees. I guess, excuse me, I guess if a row officer hired an employee over the salary, the salary board could change it, I guess, couldn't they?
Takes 3 votes.
Yeah.
I do have a comment though regarding my office, if I may.
Yeah, are we gonna let row officers comment? I think we should.
Sure.
Go ahead. Definitely.
I only have one, and it's the chief deputy, who is, I'm not there, he is the sheriff, he's the acting sheriff. And right now, in the way the salaries are structured through union negotiations, et cetera, my chief deputy makes, I don't know, less than $1 more than my captain. But all in all, my captain makes more than the chief. So if I were to hire a new chief, from what I'm sort of gathering here, I'm gonna have to, well, I don't have to, but I may have to consider hiring a chief deputy at a much lower rate. Why would you want to become chief deputy? So I just want you guys to consider that too, that, you know, this is management, and in most cases, these non-union employees are management, and I'm looking for someone that can take over when I'm not there. And, you know, I'm not gonna speak for any other officer or department head, but in these non-union positions in my office, I gotta hire him at pretty much where he left off. So if Mark retires, I'm pretty much gonna have to hire a chief deputy at that rate. So what's to have somebody to accept the position if they're gonna have to make $4 less?
That's a good point.
Thank you very much.
Diane?
I'm sure in the county code, when I'm not there, my first deputy is me. Is all the rights and the same authority in my absence.
That's true with every
Yes.
row officer.
Yes, every row is in the county code. The way it goes.
Excuse me, I got throat problems this morning. But the chief deputy can even sign your signature, right?
Well, she wouldn't sign my signature, she'd sign her own
Well,
signature.
I know in Glenna's office, her chief deputy signs $100 for her papers.
And then she initials the form.
Yeah, right.
And that's a very valid point. You know, there are a lot of positions like that in the market.
Oh, thank you, sir.
That somebody comes in, they come at or near, very close to the person that they succeeded. So that's because we've got a group of positions in here, you know, between management and non-management, and that's what makes this a very complex issue.
But let's face it, anything we set up, there's going to be exceptions to it. There's exceptions to every
Almost with
rule.
everything.
And as Jim said, it is market driven, and that's where the exception comes in many cases.
Yeah, I'd like to say this, I agree with Mike on this. And some of these cases, like Mark Pepper, that's not even that much of a question. You know his background, or I just happen to know him, he's got 20 years experience in the Butler City Police Department, and you know, a lot of employees I had to ask their background, like Amy Peters. But we can certainly go around and do that, and see if it's in the same, you know, that they have 22 years experience in that field. I mean, I can look at that and say that Mark Pepper is underpaid right now. I mean, it's sort of obvious to me. That's what the study does for us. You know, it takes the people that are obvious, you know, it helps us. It's maybe not obvious if you don't have the salary study, but it's very obvious if you have the salary study that he's one of the, you know, 15 people that are underpaid or 20 people that are underpaid. And we've got people that are overpaid. And how to address that? And where do we get the money to make the increase? And, you know, I wanted to get it off the people that are overpaid. Now that you don't have that, you know, where do you just can't say, well, you know, just coming up with the money out of thin air. You have to find the money.
Well, that's the other thing the board needs to address is for people outside of the scope that fell outside of the minimum or the maximum. Because that, if you adopt a policy and you have somebody below or above, now you're really opening yourself up.
Well, we talked about that, I think, some last year when Jim Battaglia was in here, how we handle that. And I think the answer was that you move the people up so that they're in our range if they're below it. And if they're above it, we don't give them raises till they fall back into the range.
I concur with that too. Okay, or,
Yeah, that's, how many people do we have below?
Only 2 or 3, wasn't it?
Okay.
yeah, but not in a real sense. Not in a real sense. If you take somebody, you know, if you take somebody and they're way, just because they're under the minimum, what if they have 20 years experience? You can't really say, in the field I'm talking about, in the field. You know, that's, you just can't say, well, we made the range, that's great. You know, if somebody has 20 years experience and is really low paid, that they're not, what difference does it make to me if they're in the range? They can still argue the point that they're not being treated as fairly as men or other women that have the equal skills.
But if they're in the range, then that's why we would have the range, so we could look at that individual and say, hey, you're too low in the range with your experience and your education and so forth. You need to be at the upper end of the range, and we can make those changes.
Can I ask Mr. Pinkerton a question? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but you were the one who has been asking to do a salary study since you were in office the last time. What was your philosophy behind having a salary study, the problems you needed it to solve?
I really feel that we needed to figure out a way in putting union and non-union people in salary brackets that we can figure out where they stand. In other words, children and youth, okay, we've got a lot of employees that are in those categories that are getting paid different salaries and so forth. As far as I'm concerned, that creates a lot of headaches for department heads and those kind of things. Now, if we would come up with a program, I've always said that if we come up with a program that would take into account their education, the number of years and so forth. The problem we've had in the past is we've had people on salary board who feel when someone was hired at $10 an hour and they got 3% every year, they shouldn't even look for more money. Consequently, we've got employees that are way off, really way off kilter in comparison to where they should be. Because even if they got their master's degree and all those things, they got $500 for their master's degree, they never got credit for some of the other things that they've done for this county. I think what we're talking about could work, you know, as we put a minimum salary and then we have different levels. But we're going to have to somehow, and we did stop for row officers, the automatic increases, and there are people who are above the limit. I in no way would say that they ought to give money back. We can't do that to someone. That's not fair. But we could stop that salary until they catch up. And it eventually would catch up. And I really believe we need to take the salary study. We need to look at the qualifications and so forth. The merit increase is the part that's going to be very difficult for the managers. Because the managers, and I've seen it, I worked for Goodyear, I had 150 employees for almost 40 years. When you sit down and try to rate employees on what they do and how they do it, and this guy's real friendly or this girl's real friendly, and and personalities and so forth get involved in it, you need to have pretty solid guidelines to do it. And you can't vary from those guidelines, because if you do, okay, you're making exceptions for people that shouldn't be made.
Dale, you're saying guidelines to determine whether they receive a merit raise or not?
Correct.
Okay.
I really believe that we're on the right track as far as a number of years service and so forth, but we really need to look at the whole. And we really never had any idea of where we stood amongst the other counties. And it's eye-opening when you look at some of them. I mean, it's really eye-opening to see, and if you look at other counties and how many employees they have in certain departments and how many we have, it really opens your eyes. Because in most cases, we have less poor employees on our payroll than most other counties for the number of people that we're taking care of. And I think basically we do a real good job. And I think one of the reasons that we don't lose a lot of people, like, I listen to other commissioners, well, they're always looking for people, other department heads. We are paid fair wages, okay, but there are some that are not making enough, and there are some that are making too much. And it's going to create a problem when we do decide what the level is, and if we stop people from getting raises, maybe some of those people will retire because they'll be upset about it. But I think what we're trying to do, and what I always wanted to do, was put this thing together so that we could explain it to people. And we need to take the personal part of it out of the salary board. We need to come up with the rules and regulations, okay, and then let it run it, not individuals, not votes, because I don't like this person, I'm not giving them a raise and all those kind of things. And there isn't anyone that can sit here that can't say that hasn't happened. In the 6 years I've been here, I've seen it happen so much I can't believe it. But we need to come up with the guidelines to protect our employees and give them a decent salary and to move it forward. And that's been my thought all along.
It's much more difficult in a government setting to quantify whether a person's entitled to a raise or not. In Goodyear, raises were tied to production to a large degree. But we don't have that here. We can't say, well, this person paid more money from the county, so they're entitled to a raise like we do in private industry, like I did in my business.
Well, and that's true. If it was production and sales that we did it by. But there are a lot of categories that we could take a look at. How many families they represent and that kind of thing for children and youth, and how many complaints they have. And, you know, there are, I'm sure, a lot of areas that Carmine and children and youth departments and so forth could come up with that would grade those people.
But that's true down there. Maybe let's pick an example. How would you determine which of your employees deserve raises because they're not producing anything?
Well, unfortunately, I only have one non-union employee, but boy, would I love the opportunity to merit raise not the union employees. Why, you know, part of me thinks, well, why should, you know, this lazy person, not saying they're lazy, get a 3% raise when somebody works their rear end off, gets a 3% raise? So what's the motivation for a 3% raise?
How about your office, Ben?
Well, one of the things that I've seen that has happened in the corporate sector, like for instance last year when we budgeted for increases for the division that I worked for, they didn't come and say, well, everybody gets X number of percentage. They said you take your total compensation, wages and payroll, and that is only allowed to increase by 2.5%. That allowed the department heads to say, well, I want to give this person 3%, this person 2%, this person, but it had to average at the end of the day 2.5%. So if you did that within the row officers and said, hey, this is what you get within your budget, it can only increase by X%, then that would give them the confines of, we give them a budgetary structure, a limit, but allow them the authority to give increases if they saw fit. So if that's how you wanted to move in that direction, I think that's...
Yeah, that's done quite frequently.
I mean, that's how the private sector is doing it. So it's managing, not micromanaging.
I'd like to say this, I'm really concerned about, and there's only, the warden had this in prison too, there's the Caps and Justin Baptiste, the drug supervisor, but there's not that many that have this problem that Mike has. I mean, compared to the 180, that they're right there, they're not role models, they're leaders. I mean, they have rank, and we have to do something about that. you can't have these people with a rank not having a difference. You know, and the sheriff brought that out to me, we've known this for a long time, but there's only, well, there's the two assistant wardens too. But I mean, you don't have to give everybody a 3% raise like Ben just said. You get the total amount and say, we have to address this problem, whether in the sheriff's department or in the prison. I mean, that's an excellent idea there, and some people are gonna get 1% until we address that problem. With, you can't have people with this rank, and you won't get anybody to move up, just like the prison's a terrible problem with that. You know, the warden told us that, and, you know, I don't think you can have that. That's my opinion, in a like a military situation where people have rank, you can't do that, or it's not gonna work.
That's what we're trying to solve here. I think the first goal we have to do is set up a range. Are we going to use the ranges in the salary study, or are we going to make up our own range?
I think the salary study is good for a lot of it, but when you get into the management part of it, like the sergeants and those kind of people, I think maybe they ought to have a different salary limit if they're gonna move up that way.
Aren't they in the salary study?
Huh?
They're in the salary study.
Yeah.
So their range is higher if we go by the salary study,
Okay.
but they're not at the top of their range.
There definitely has to be a fairly big difference between a union employee and a management employee down there at the prison or in the sheriff's office and places like that. I mean, it's just not
Well,
fair
no,
for the
no,
amount of.
Wait a minute now. Not necessarily, because we have non-union employees who are doing, for instance, Debbie out there, she's a non-union employee. So does that mean there doesn't have to be a lot of difference just because they're union and non-union? Depends on their job description.
No, that's true.
That's where this gets very complex, and especially for someone like myself new coming in, because I don't want to in any way discount what Mike said. I guess the things that I've dealt with so far have been what I would consider non-union, non-management. And that's a whole different scenario than somebody who's non-union management.
You could,
I mean, those are two different situations, sorry.
Yeah. I'd like to hear from, you don't have any other row officers, I'd like to hear from Tom, you're representing all the courts.
I'm just sucking in information this morning.
Oh, you're not getting out that easy, Tom, come on. Make him do it, Bill.
I was just concerned that in the probation offices, it's much like Mike's office. We have deputy chiefs that are actually making less than the supervisors that are union employees. And it becomes difficult to find qualified people who want to move up and take leadership roles. So your conversation, I think, is right on point for us.
Okay. Carmine, you run the biggest department in the county, I guess.
I like the concept of performance-based merit, but I think I need to caution the committee that you have to be very scientific in how you go about setting the performance standards. It's got to be measurable, and you have to set up those objectives based on the actual work. And like Ben was talking about with the banking system. In human service, there's a lot of soft targets that we talk about. You know, how well does a person get from working with them, and things like that. How do you show success in some of our programs and everything? It's not that it can't be done, but you'd have to put some time and effort up front. Because you also want them to focus on the routine functions of a job, but also then the other things in terms of where you make the biggest difference in terms of how you progress in providing services to a family or to an individual. So just a caution in terms of if you go about looking at performance rating, you're going to have to put a lot because people will challenge that. On what basis did you give me a 1% or a 3% or something?
And that makes you the bad guy.
Well, in performance rating, that's what it comes about. But I did some consulting one time with a program in Colorado, and they lost half of their staff over a performance-based system. But it takes time for people to come around to that and to adapt to it. But what I'm saying is, people are gonna challenge it, and you gotta make sure that it's scientific and measurable in terms of the targets that you choose for a merit increase.
But nobody knows your department better than you. I couldn't come down and evaluate you. I couldn't evaluate Mike. The only one I could do is my own office.
Right.
And so that's where, you know, if you're gonna go with this approach from a budgetary standpoint, there is a lot of trust and confidence.
Oh, yeah,
And
yeah. But I'm saying,
blame,
what-
so to
the
speak,
things,
that's
the things that we
transferred.
set up are gonna be a lot different, I think, maybe. I mean, for example, with the police, you might look at how many people are arrested and more factual kinds of stuff. With us, there's a lot of soft things you have to consider in terms of how that person is benefiting the community. And I'm just saying, there's gotta be a scientific approach to this, and it's gotta be measurable.
Gary, oh, I'm sorry. Gary, your department head, what? Do you have any input for us?
No, the only reason why I'm here, very honestly, is there is a very good possibility that one of my employees will be leaving. And again, to find out what's gonna happen in the future. Because I know some of the things that affected, or could affect their decision, again, you know, where they're looking at going, is they know that every year he's gonna be looking at, or them getting a certain amount of raise. They know where hospitalization, what rate that's gonna be. They know what the extra benefits are that they receive, you know, even down to whether of extending the education possibilities, you know, where only, you know, one person can go to an educational conference, you know, even though there's varied programs, you know, and it's a possibility where that's being supported. You know, so I'm just kind of curious where we're going to see, you know, if that's what happened, is where we're going to be, and to offer who's coming in, you know, or whoever may be coming in. And again, I'll be very honest, where I am in my career here kind of affects what my decision down the future will be too.
Mr. McCarrier,
Yes.
just in an effort to muddy the waters a bit, you might, as an option, also look at how the state does pay raises. It's a two-step process.
You're doing like this and that, I'm not.
Pay grades are increased by a percentage based on the consumer price index. But from within the pay grade annually, you have the opportunity for a merit raise. So the state does that for us, does both things. The pay grade can increase by 1-point-some%, but then in my case, the Supreme Court has the option of, within the budget constraints that have been afforded by the legislature, awarding merit increases in addition to that CPI, cost of living raise.
Who determines those merit raises in your department? You?
The president judge.
President Judge?
Yes.
So
Well,
you-
the president judge does the evaluations, and the state has a very comprehensive evaluation process. The judge does the evaluation, signs off on them, and then the percentages are determined by the AOPC.
So the judge is either a good guy or a bad guy, determining whether you get the raise or not.
The judge is judicious in all of his decisions.
Or you had something you wanted to say?
Well, I was going to comment, maybe you want to make two different policies, one for non-exempt under the non-union and one exempt, where that would understand where the leadership roles will fall in. And also, I think you need to take into consideration, a lot of people come in more than what the job description says, but not necessarily what the job means. So I want to make sure that you don't, say, well, I'm bringing this person in that has, a master's degree and 20 years experience, but it's not needed for that job. So, but the person say, well, then I'm going to give them $2 more, so I'm going to remind with a salary board, you want to maybe address those issues.
But if that person came in and had a degree in some other field, you're saying, and a lot of experience, why would you even hire them?
Well, I'm just saying they might be good for this position, but, I just think that might need addressed. You might, a department head might look at that and say, well, then, they have 10 years experience, I'm gonna put them at this range, this rate, because it's $2 more than the minimum, but really that wasn't for the job itself. I think the job description needs to be driven by what the ranges are, or moving.
I'd just like to make one thing clear. Somebody said on performance-based, maybe we can, on how many people they arrest or whatever. I want to make sure Tom Holman and Doug Ritson know. I want to pay you on how many people keep out of jail. Okay, Tom, just so you know that.
Carmine?
I would like to just also say, I'd like to reinforce what Ben said about working with the department heads, because there's some things in terms of when people come on, and we're going through this right now, Lori and I have talked about this in the past, when we're interviewing people, and we say, well, what's your experience? And then you get into, well, is this full-time experience or part-time experience? Do you give experience for volunteer work? And that's where sometimes you've got to kind of give some flexibility in that process of making those determinations. I don't think you can really say, we're going to count part-time as, 20 hours, 30 hours. But we have people now, especially with this job market, that have part-time experience, for example, and how you adjust for that.
But, it goes back to, if you do this on an aggregate level and it increases, you're not relinquishing any of the budgetary authority given to you by law. And not only that, I would argue that should be your responsibility and you should keep that. But essentially, then you pass along that responsibility and trust to the people that you put in this position. So that from a high level perspective, you're staying within your budget, you're managing that budget, they're just managing the increases. And I think you're taking it closer out into the field where people like Carmen and Gary and the different row officers, even for that matter, can make those decisions within their department, because they're the ones ultimately responsible for that. Now, I would say, and I think Tom Holman brought up a good point, that it would have to at least be a minimum of the consumer price index. So they couldn't just go to that person and say, you're getting a 0% raise. So at least keeps them up with the cost of living.
Well, sometimes if you want to force a person out, you give them a 0 raise.
I'm just throwing out some suggestions there. And
Or like if Mike says he'd like to give some people a 0% raise. I agree with Mike on that.
But then, we're spending an awful lot of time in this, which is rightfully so, but we're only dealing with about 180 employees. And we have all these union employees. How do we correlate the two together?
But
whatever we do here, whatever we decided, we're going to try and do the same thing in our negotiations. I know.
I think it behooves you greatly to have something in place before you go into collective bargaining. If you don't, I think you really put yourself behind the 8 ball.
I agree with that.
If you have this in place and you're able to go to the unions, I think you really have some additional leverage.
Okay.
And I also want to concur that you've got to break this up. Again, I've been dealing a lot with non-union, or what we would say, exempt, salaried employees. They're not management. I think you need to break out those two different classifications. I know when I came out in the market in 2009, one of the reasons I went into accounting was just before I went into college, Sarbanes-Oxley here. Well, the demand for accountants went up significantly. And I guarantee that people before me coming out of college were making significantly more. Now, when I came out, the market was starting to get flooded with accountants. So what happened? The rate came down. And I want to get back to what you were saying with, what does the position need? Do we need somebody with all the experience? I was talking with a PNC recruiter once, and they said, if you get your bachelor's and your master's, and you come to work for us, we're going to pay you the same as somebody with a bachelor's. Now, I'm not trying to discredit master's and higher education degrees, but bottom line is they're putting weight on the experience. They say, if you get your bachelor's, you get 5 years of experience, and then you get your master's, we're going to pay you significantly more. So they're really putting the emphasis on the experience, which is, I'm a big believer in bettering yourself with higher degrees, but nothing, in my opinion, is more valuable than experience. But what does it take? Sometimes you may need a department head, if they know, okay, I'm going to start a non-union, non-management employee, if they know that they have to start at the minimum, then I think it gives them a starting block. Now, they might not be able to find somebody, but at that point, then they need to come back and address that. And if they need somebody with more experience, then they have a policy in place. But maybe the job doesn't merit it. But with management employees, and I would say this with any company, they're not going to start somebody out at the minimum. They don't want somebody running a department, paying them because that's not going to last too long. That person's going to leave very quickly if that were the case. So I think we do need to segregate this to classification.
But I think everything we've talked about, it comes back to this range, or we're going to set up a range for employees and give the department heads the authority to hire within this range. If the person has experience, they can go a little higher than the minimum. How are we going to do that?
And I can suggest that if that's more or less the consensus of where you would like to move toward, you can direct us at this point to come up with some draft policies. And this may take several or a series of work sessions to get to the point where you're happy with a set of policies or a way to administer this. And so, no need to make hard and fast decisions here, but you can direct us then to come back to the next session with these kinds of things hammered down then for you to discuss further.
Well, I don't think we need to vote on that, but is that a consensus? Is that what we want them to do, is come up with a range that's acceptable?
Absolutely.
Non-exempt policy and an exempt policy, different policies.
Yep.
And I'm also hearing that there's consensus for a policy that would start people at a minimum and have some kind of ability to adjust that for experience. Should we come back to you with some kind of policy that
Experience,
addresses?
experience and cost of living. But education, as Ben or somebody pointed out there, isn't necessarily it would have to be education in the field. For instance, when I was teaching school, you had to get so many advanced credits, and I was working on my master's, but this one time, there was no course at the time I could take it except Pennsylvania history. So I took a course in Pennsylvania history towards my master's degree in mathematics. But that's just the way the system works. There's always flaws in the system. Tom was a teacher too. He's nodding his head back there.
That kind of goes back to the job description, it's driven
Yeah.
education.
So the education has to be in the field that you're working in, I would think.
Well, you would, you need the minimal education, I agree.
Education or experience,
Mm-hmm.
because, you know, I'm not gonna say anything, but, you know, maybe Mark doesn't have a bachelor's, maybe he doesn't have an associate, but he's a hell of a good chief. But he's like, he's had 20-plus years in police work, he's been, you know, he supervised people, you know, through experience. Maybe he doesn't have the education that, you know, you're talking about. So, you know, for me, I gotta caution and say, hey, just because he doesn't have a college education or whatever type of degree, doesn't mean he can't do the job.
That's exactly right.
I
And
agree.
I'll just be straight up, I don't have a college education, I think I'm a dang good sheriff.
Oh.
Dang it.
Okay.
So,
So are you asking us for a merit raise?
yes, 1%.
And the
So-
job description should reflect that,
Right.
that education is not necessarily hard and fast if experience would balance that out. And so the job descriptions need to be precise and robust and rich.
We just went through that.
Exactly right. To get
It's
to
all
these.
been revised this past year.
Just like everything else, it's the totality of the circumstances. Take the whole picture and make a decision from
You're right.
Do I also hear maybe some interest in us looking at how the state sets up their
Yeah, I'd like to know
CBI
more
and
about
merit?
that.
Yeah,
For
Tom,
police for you
that
to
was a
look
good
at more
idea.
closely?
I definitely concur with Tom on that. We don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Because I think with like non-exempt, or excuse me, with non-union, not management, I think these department heads, if they have a position, they should know that that's their starting block. And if they really truly can't find the qualified applicant, then they need to come back again and say, well, now I know that I need somebody with more more experience. And maybe they can take somebody with the experience because that's what the market's paying and start them out. That's the policy that we need to have in place where if they do need somebody with 5 or 10 years of experience, maybe I'd like to see what would it be if it was a dollar figure, $1 above, $2 above, $3 above versus a percentage.
Well, but when you get into higher ranges, a dollar means less.
Less.
Lower ranges,
That's
a dollar means.
and so you might need to, we'd have to see the numbers.
Right.
And look what Tom said about the COLA plus the merit. I think that will encourage the employee. If they come to me with a better way of doing something, or an idea on how to save money, that's all part of their performance, and that's spurring them on. And then they get a reward for not being dead wood. They're just coming in and just walking on the treadmill every day. They're thinking about how to do it better. And to just,
Let me put you on the spot. You have how many, 5, 6 employees now? 6 employees. Okay. Are you willing to be the bad person for half of them that don't get a merit raise?
I have 2 that are subject to this study. And as I was expressing earlier the other day, I've sat in this seat when I worked for,
No.
yes, yes. I'd have to sit down and we would sit there, we would go through point by point and there, if you ended up with a grade of a 3, the corporation said, okay, if you're rated a 3, this is what your pay increase is. If you're rated a 4, you get a little bit more. And then you sit there and you talk about career path.
4, a little bit more?
Yeah, right. Or, yeah, so, and it's an exchange. They read it before they even come in, they write their comments down if they disagree with what you did, with what you said, and then you go back and forth, and then you discuss career path. Where do you want, it's always, where do you see yourself at the bank in 5 years? Because we were to build them up and to encourage them. That was all part of the performance appraisal process. Not just getting money, but to enhance their career, to make them a better employee for the bank.
Okay, you brought up an important thing. There has to be a method of determining that merit raise. You can't just say, well, I think Mark's a good guy, we'll give him.
Yeah, the subjectivity of it, and this is just a footnote to the whole salary board. I really think we need to refrain from individuals. We need to talk about positions. Because I know whenever we're talking about these positions and we tack a person's name to it, that makes it personal. I don't think that feels, I don't think that makes them feel good. I think we just need to talk about the position.
But the merit raise is based on the person.
Yes, but when we're talking about salary ranges and positions, at the salary board level, this level, I think it needs to be about the position and not about the individual that we know who is in that position.
Right. Now,
That's my thought.
when we come up with this rating system, does every department have to have their own? How do we determine what the rating system would be?
I think
I have one lying on my desk here now to fill out for the president of Slippery Rock University. It's 12 pages long. That certainly wouldn't be one that you could apply to your department.
Right. I think each one would be different in some fashion. I think there should be a base. There should be a basic framework that you perform the basic do.
There's a lot of software out there that does
Oh, is there?
merit-based
Okay.
systems that we could look into, performance evaluation forms, things like that. We would have to.
That's good. That won't be easy because Diane's rating form can't be the same as Mike's. They're doing different things.
That's what
To a
you-
certain degree, there are things, well, do they come to work in time and things like that would be the same no matter where you go, but there's a lot of things that are specific to the department or the roles.
And I agree with what Ben said, because I've had this thought already, go to this merit base and the salary range and everything, and I come back and I say, okay, this person or this position, this person in this position has done a stellar job, and I think they are deserving of this percentage of increase. I wouldn't want anybody on the salary board to question me, because that's my job, that's my first-hand experience. And Carmine evaluates somebody, I don't know, should people be looking over his shoulder and questioning his professional, firsthand observation of that individual's performance?
But see, that's the problem with salary board, is
Yeah.
become too politicized. So if you trust your department heads who are
Right,
closer to it,
exactly.
then
That's
it's
what
not
we
like,
need.
well, I don't like Ben Holland, so we're gonna vote against him when he comes for his
Right, you know,
employee,
that-
because he didn't vote for my
Trust.
person, and, that's what happens is you get up here on the fifth floor, it's
Right,
very
well, we need to get away,
political and-
you need to trust the people
Yeah,
in the
exactly.
field,
Exactly.
on the
And-
ground.
And from a budgetary
with their- with
standpoint,
their-
it's the same. If we were gonna
Right,
give
right.
everybody a 2% raise, it's gonna have the same effect as if we just said, you're only allowed to increase your budget by 2%. And Mike may say, hey, I wanna cut back a little bit, I'm not gonna take the full 2%. I don't, it just puts more trust, and it takes the responsibility, and you offload that onto the department heads and the elected officials. And from a budgetary standpoint, you're at the same exact position you were in the first place.
Well, I'd like to say this. Look, I got elected to do a job. I'm not giving my rights to anybody that's not elected. Okay, you can discuss this all you want, but I'm not just judging on my job. You know, Mike Sloop's job is to do this. He got elected. I'll make this clear. I'm not giving my rights to any. In the 3 in the salary board, somebody said here this before, 3 out of the 5 wins, okay? That, I'm not giving that up. I mean, some people, the system's broken right now. The system is broken right now. If you look at this chart, we haven't been doing it fair. We want to do it fair. And also why I have this, I want to make this extremely clear. We have not talked about this yet. We have to address the problem of the 12 most underpaid people in this county, and I think we have to do it sooner rather than later. No, I agree with Jack McMillan, he's not here, but I agreed with Jack's plan. You do it on a good faith effort, maybe if they're 10% underpaid, you do it 3 or 4% for 3 years in a row. And I think that was an excellent idea, but we have to address this issue. You don't have to be we're not supposed to say Mark Pepper is a good employee, or we know his background, or Doug Ritson. You know, I mean, he's so far underpaid, it's just about ridiculous. Are we gonna address that issue now or in a
But
year
this gives
from
you the
now?
flexibility to do that, because you, as a commissioner, these department heads report to you. And so I think that you could go and put some pressure on them to say, I think this person's underpaid. You need to work within your budget, and that you're gonna correct that much faster than you would by just doing an overall, hey, we're gonna give everybody a 2% raise. Because then they have flexibility within their budget, and you can sit down department by department and go through these and make the corrections as you see fit.
Well, you know what my vote was? I didn't want to give everybody a 3% raise. I wanted to give 1.5% and make the
I know.
corrections. Correct?
Yeah,
I was
I
the
think,
only one that voted that
well,
way.
you know what, that was the past, this is the future, and I think this is a way that you're gonna be able to make that correction.
Yeah.
And we can make those corrections once we have this range established. We can put them into the range or move them up in the range. We have to establish, we can't just do it randomly, we have to have the range. And that's why we did the salary stuff.
So I think we have enough of a consensus, at least for us to take this and work on it to come back to a future session. Is there anything else that you would want to inform us of?
Maybe just the one thing is, within the ranges, how do we index that? Do we increase that by what we're increasing wages by, or do we tie that into some kind of CPI? That's the other thing as well. And then I would also make the suggestion that once we get a policy in place, we revisit this every 4 years to tune it up.
That's another point. How do we revisit this over time?
And I'd just say 4 because it would be consistent with how the commissioners.
What did Archer tell us?
He suggested around 3 to 5 years.
3 to 5 years.
You agree with that?
Then he would evaluate to see if the ranges need to be. But you have to remember too that everybody was given a grade, and the grade is based on the job description and what they did and what he interviewed. So, he feels that the ranges are correct for the grade per the position. So I think those are, I'm just kind of reiterating what Diane said about positions. It's really about the positions, what grade they are and what range they're in. And that's what the study gave us.
just one other thing, you know, we discussed, you bring up a good point with, well, a dollar, if we went like a dollar-based experience criteria, a dollar's gonna be less. That's why I said we need to kind of see, maybe with some ranges or pay grades, it's a dollar value based versus a percentage, because you get up into these higher salaries, the law of large numbers comes into place, and that means, I mean, a percentage then has a lot more impact, so.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Yeah.
Thank you, I think this has been a really productive discussion so far.
We missed one of the three, right?
Well, we aren't, we're gonna
We're just-
continue.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize.
Okay,
Let's-
this was
let's
just
move on to
item
num-
one.
Let's move on to number 2, and we can discuss these.
Number two, we wanted to have a discussion of a proposed restructuring of administrative positions. And I'd like to turn this to Lori to kind of explain where this came from, to get to the point where we have a proposal for you to start discussing. I can hand down.
One of the conversations that I think started, and I think it started with the coroner, was the administrative assistants, and we looked at the administrative assistants positions, and I think there was something like 27 different types of administrative assistants in the different categories. And so, what I was asked to do is try to categorize the different administrative assistant positions and group them based on their job descriptions and things like that.
We had like 17 different
Thank you.
titles and ranges and so forth.
So what we did was, there's a type of administrative assistant that doesn't have any people reporting to them, might have been the administrative assistant to a department head or elected official. Then the second category was more of administrative assistant that had supervisory duties. They supervised union clerical people below them. And then the third category was a type of executive administrative assistant, and it was based on who they reported to, judges and commissioners. So I was asked to kind of put them in 3 different categories and try to find some type of parity within those categories. And that's what this spreadsheet does. Basically, it kind of, it might move people up or down within their range. It's just to find 3 different types of administrative assistants.
Those 3 are the ones top, the first 3 lines.
That's right, the first,
That's the proposal.
that is the proposal of the rates for the administrative one, supervisor administrative assistant, and executive administrative assistant. And then moving the positions where those ranges are. Some people would go up or down, and probably by attrition. You would do that. The cost right now, if you would do this action, would be about $9,800. That little number, corner, left corner, about $10,000 would be the cost.
Up or down 9,000?
It's on the second page.
Oh, I
I'm
see.
sorry, it went on to a second page.
It's not on mine. Mine says
The
mine.
upper, this.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
Yes.
It would cost us $9,864.
If you did the action at the next salary board.
And then the long range, though,
But-
would say was 21,000.
That's what
Correct.
this is gonna say, because it's
The 21,000, because by
Because
attrition,
attrition.
you would move these people and they would have a different rate of pay.
so this one, because there was 2 of them, but this one created more parity with the increases between, say, 1 and 2 and 2 and 3.
Correct.
Okay.
It's a dollar increase.
This actually had this was more of a savings in the long run.
Correct.
To the other one, right?
Correct.
Okay. That's why I was leaning more in favor of this one.
Well,
Yes.
how can we implement this? This would be for new starting positions.
Well, I mean, if you did a salary board action to this, I would, move the people to, some of the people would give it an increase right away.
But these are all non-union?
Yes.
Why don't we do it like
Can you believe
tax
it?
assessment, revenue neutral? How about that idea? We can make 4 groups that do it like tax assessment, they have to do revenue neutral. Why are we giving people raises? And this is an area that I didn't see anybody that was underpaid in executive assistants. Did anybody notice that in the salary study?
Well, I didn't see
Well, the
there's,
executive assistants are all going down. They're not all,
Or any of these assistants? I didn't notice anybody underpaid.
well, if you look down there, Jim, in the difference column, most of those are minuses.
right.
Long-term,
They're
it is.
long-term decreases.
And by the way, if you look at the administrative assistants across this county, it's a nightmare. It's all over the place. There's no consistency anyway. I mean, it's a complete disaster.
Like Judge Sturr doesn't like the magistrate's assistants going down to 3,000 apiece.
Well, he has a vote. I mean, that's why we need to include everyone in this process. And I think before this was ever passed, that we would need to get the consensus from the other salary boards.
Again, today, I think we're just looking for consensus in this. We're not going to take action. I think all this has to be done in one fell swoop.
And to digest this and discuss it, see if it's a structure that I think has merit for resolving that issue of so many different positions at different rates. So we just present it for discussion and for digesting at this point.
Again, I look to the road officers and department heads for this.
I don't have an administrative assistant.
Oh.
Yeah.
I don't have it.
You got anything?
I do my own typing.
Yeah, you're the cause of this, by the
I
way.
did my own secretary stuff.
Recorder joined us an hour. Were you on a recorder call?
Yes.
Not another drug?
No, I haven't had a drug yet for 4 days.
Oh, jeez.
Good. Tom?
The court would stand in support of that proposal.
Carmine?
Fine.
Gary?
Question. As far as the administrative assistant, does that, and again, as I see in the next item about the longevity, is this plus longevity?
Well,
This
we
is
haven't-
base rate at this
We haven't
time.
discussed longevity. This
Yeah.
is base rate.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying, but currently, right now, for example, if this would be put into effect, and the person who is in that position already has the longevity, is it added to that rate right now?
Right now, that's the structure.
But what about, if this is adopted, is this the top rate, or is the longevity time
Well, that
added
depends-
to that?
That depends on what we do with longevity. If we do away with longevity, then new employees would not get that.
Right, but what I'm saying, the current person that fills that position has longevity.
Yes.
And my question is, you're saying taking these rates to 19 whatever, is that the top of the rate, or are you gonna add the longevity to that?
The longevity is added, will be added to that.
Okay.
If it remains.
Correct.
Yeah, but I'm just,
You're assuming that somebody right now is here and has longevity or is eligible for longevity.
right, yeah,
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 that would be
because,
added in
yeah, because,
addition to that.
yeah, because very honestly, Ben, in my department, the administrative assistant basically is also a bookkeeper. You know what I mean, as far as keeping track of it, because all the money that comes to the treasurer's office that comes through you passes through her hands.
Yeah.
You know, so there's more than
Well,
just typing and answering the phones and, you know.
That's true with a lot of the.
Yeah, it is,
people in that
and, you know,
position.
and then she works, this individual works odd hours because she actually helps, because again, we're one of the smallest departments in the county. You know, when we run an event in the evening or in the middle of the winter, you know, like I say, candy cane, or whatever, she's there. You know, I mean, she's one of the main functions to make this work.
And as you can see, she was the top
Right,
number.
right.
That's what we based it, that's why she made more than the other administrative assistants with her type of category.
Right, yeah, and as long as longevity goes on top of that, then,
But if you were to hire someone new, it would be at the 19,279, okay, and it's up, depending on what we do with longevity, that would be the salary.
I'd like to say this, I think some of this is a little ridiculous. You know, we have to do it through attrition. I mean, we don't have to do it through attrition. I mean, I can only vote on, I could be out of here in 2 years. A lot of people think that. I mean, we can't set the policy for way down the road. Why can't you make it revenue neutral and do this quicker? You know, you can make people, you know, only get a 2% raise instead of 3% raise. I mean, you can sit here all you want and say you're gonna do this. We get two conservative people in here and you go, we're gonna gear that right up. They're not gonna do it with attrition. I mean, I would never do it through attrition, and I'm not even sure why we're doing. I'm a little, we're correcting the thing first that needs the least help, except everybody's overpaid. You know, I mean, I looked through the salary study, anybody can help themselves. But the persons we had addressed the least about giving a raise, we're telling me we're gonna give them, the most overpaid people in the county, a $10,000 a year raise. Are you kidding me? I mean, I'm not gonna vote for that, to do that. I mean, I don't even know why we're starting with administrative assistants first. You know, I agree with, don't worry, I agree with this. We need to get down to 3 or 4 categories. There's no agreement there, but how about a minus on the, I'm dead serious about this. If somebody can point to me or send me an email and say, wow, these are the most people that are the biggest disparity or the most underpaid, we're starting out with the people that are overpaid and giving them an increase. That's what I see here, that's what this paper says. You know, I mean, why are we doing that? Because they're connected? I mean, I can't figure that out. I'm just being blunt, you know me. I mean, you know, why would we do that? I don't know. I'll have to study it. I'll have to study it.
That's the bottom line of this whole entire meeting, is to review this. This is where we're not passing anything. You know, I think it's a good starting block, but, you know, if you have any suggestions, I would welcome.
Well, I'd like to start with the people that are underpaid. You know, not the people that are overpaid.
I give you a perfect opportunity to make those adjustments. If you go to a department level merit increase with budgetary constraints, I think it gives you more flexibility to make those adjustments. I think you're gonna have a better chance doing that than you will with the current.
What you're talking about, Jim, that's one of the things that would be addressed if we adopt the ranges, and those people who are underpaid, we can move them up in that range. Hopefully we'll have that done in a month or so.
But the minuses, we're supposed to take through attrition. That would mean, to me, that means
Well,
20 years.
I wasn't just talking about these people, I'm talking about the people you're talking about, the ones who are underpaid. We need that range so we know where we can move them to. And this, if you want to move, you want to cut people's salaries?
No, I want to make it zero. Nobody ever said to cut anybody's salaries. I never heard any
Well, to
county
make-
official or anybody here, I thought we got to do it at zero.
To
You know,
make-
I didn't think, or like, even like Ben, I would have been happy. I put on the table to do 1.5% raise. You know, the last time, nobody went for
But
it.
to make this zero, we would have to cut people's wages immediately, wouldn't we?
Not if you worked it in over the next 2 years when I'm in office. I can't do anything about it if I'm not in office anymore. If you did it over 2 years, you could certainly do it and make it revenue neutral. I mean, I don't, that's my opinion. It would go a long way. It would certainly go in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to truly get these within the same classification and have it revenue neutral, it would require some people to decrease. Because if you're looking at third class, what this is essentially doing, it kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier, is it's easier to take somebody, you can give somebody raises to get them within the minimum, but it's like if they're at the maximum rate, then you'd have to stop. Now, that's one thing you could do. You could, on the other hand, say, well, they're not going to
Well,
get an increase.
that's what we did with the row officers.
You can do zero and work your way to it. I don't want to leave this meeting and not address the 12 people that are underpaid. I mean, I don't know. You know, that's where I'm at. I can't see how you can take we start with the people that are most overpaid, we make it 3 categories and give them another raise. It doesn't make any sense with me. I'm worried about Mark Pepper. You don't want to give him a name, or Doug Ritson, but I'm willing to do that because it's a no-brainer. It's not the name. It's not the name. Everybody knows Doug Ritson's a good worker. You know, everybody knows some of these people. I mean, I don't, that is, you know, Chris Savage is so far underpaid. Don't we have some obligation to address that? you know, or Donna Janoreski. It's really bad, I'm giving her Donna Janoreski. Everybody told me she was just a excellent employee. I mean, I just don't see it. I don't see it. And who cares about Donna? She's making 58. She's 2,000 above the minimum, and she's got 20 years experience. And I'm gonna come out of this meeting, you know, when are we gonna address that? Or, no, I'm sorry, I was on chart 62. But she still ought to be at the midpoint. You know, I wanna address those issues.
But do you understand that if you put into place where you say to a department, okay, you get X number of percentage, then you can go down and sit with that department head and say, you know, I think this person's underpaid. You need to find more within your allotted budget increase as far as wages and payroll, salaries, to give that person and to get them more in line.
When are you gonna do it? Next
Well-
year? 1 year from now?
This isn't gonna happen overnight. And I think you realize that as well. But-
Who, me?
But this could easily be done before your first term in office expires, so if you move in that direction.
I think it can be done as soon as we set up the ranges that we're talking about.
But if somebody still, I
Thanks,
think,
Bill.
what Jim is saying is if somebody falls within that range, but, you know, that's gonna have to be something that probably takes a year to correct.
I just wanna do a good faith effort. You know, this isn't brain surgery. A lot of these people are really good people. I just wanna do, like Jack McMullen said, over a series of year and do a good faith effort. You know, a lot of these people, I mean, I know you don't want me to use names. Let's say all these 12 people, they're all wonderful people. They'll accept a good faith effort. Is it right to adjust the executive secretary's wages and not do a good faith effort? You know, I don't think it is.
Well,
It's not realistic.
What we're talking about reducing the executive secretaries with the exception of commissioners, and we're talking about 30 cents there. Not very much, 30 cents, but all the rest of them we're talking about reducing.
This is just one piece of it.
I think it has to be done in pieces. We have to do each individual, I mean, I really do. It's gonna have to be done in categories.
Well,
It makes sense.
I sort of disagree with you there. I think that we can set up this range. We can adopt or not adopt this, and we can address this third issue on our agenda all at the same time. Once we get, the first thing is we have to get these ranges set up.
I agree with that. I agree, you know, I definitely agree. I just think we have to do a good faith effort. Now that we know this, we have it right in front of us. You know, you can see where the really deficiencies are and then make a good faith effort to show a direction. And that's what I think we ought to do. Okay? You know, we spend money, you know, creating new jobs. Just, you know, I don't know how much it, you know, we spend all this money, this problem can be corrected. Oh, you know, across the board for $30,000, $40,000 or a good faith effort. Don't we have that responsibility to do that? I say we do. You know, I gotta go look at these people and work with them. And I don't think I can find $40,000 to correct some of these problems. That's my opinion. I know that the row officers would do it too. You know, Mike can rework it, look at his budget or whoever his budget is. You know, whether it's at the prison or, you know, and not do it all at once, but do it over a 3-year time period. Okay, that's what I'm saying. Something not through. You know.
That's exactly where we're headed with all of this.
And I was still talking about ranges in different categories. I wasn't, I think we do need, definitely is where the ranges should be. I wasn't saying that we need to come up with the ranges for each category. I mean, we've done administrative assistants, and we need to do some of the other categories.
Okay?
That's what I meant.
Okay, sorry.
Right now, you have a compensation structure that the salary board works within. The salary study results are not
Morning,
adopted
John.
policy of
Morning.
the county yet. So that's kind of where we're straddling the fence and we want to move off of the fence. If you wanted to come to salary board with propositions for changing those ranges within where they're created now, that's what the current structure allows for. But we aren't there yet with the ranges being our policy, to be able to administer to that structure. Does that make sense? And that's what we'd like to move, that's what I hear you gentlemen and the other salary board members in the room saying they would like to consider moving toward. And that's what we'll now take away and come back to you with some proposed policies that will move us closer to that.
Okay, let's move on to item 3.
We do have item 3. Commissioner Epstein has asked to add this to the agenda, so I'll turn it over to him for presentation.
Well, I mean, Ben can speak on this too. We're both in agreement on this. He actually brought up the idea to me, I think about 4 times. But I think it, you know, I'm not for giving anybody a raise just for being, I mean, the private sector doesn't do this. You know, and everybody's gonna say, well, then the union and the non-union people won't have parity. But we can adjust that in every department. If the person really has done well, we can have an evaluation at the 5-year point, an evaluation at the 10-year point. We can set up some hard, fast rules for that. So it's more of a merit increase, or, you know, where can you improve increase for the 6th year. You know, if we don't think you know, we only gave you half the 4.5%, 2%, and I don't think just ought to be carte blanche. I mean, it's making it unfair for the people. You know, Mike just had a good point on this. You know, some people are working really hard and some aren't. Mike knows that. I mean, geez, it's not, you know, don't we have some obligation? I'm trying to address that obligation that Mike stated. And I know he can't do that with the unions, but wouldn't it be nice? We can do it. And what, you know, couldn't we do it? You know, if there's 5 people that vote, you're to say, well, then rig it. I don't know. I'm not going to rig anything. You know, even if I have a disagreement with Mike knows this, we can have a disagreement with him or Jack McMillan. We fought like cats and dogs with Jack. But that's my job to go above that if we disagree. You know, I think we could come to you know, solutions on that. I just don't think there ought to be automatic. They don't do it in the private sector. Why are we doing it? I guess that. And I don't think it's county policy. I tried looking up her. Peggy did the best she could. I'm not saying it's not county policy, but I can't find it anywhere. I believe she contacted Lori about this, where it's just done. It's not even county policy to do this.
Yeah, it became part of the union contract, and the previous boards did the same for the non-union as they did for the union. So what was the history of that? How far back does that go?
It goes very far back.
It does.
How far back?
Very far.
And
More than
it probably
20 years.
came about because employees weren't paid a lot, and this was an incentive to keep them here. And it may about, we probably outlived it.
It was in
place prior to the union.
I mean, I made it very clear I'd love to see longevity eliminated, or certainly as it is, and it makes no sense to me why somebody after 5 years gets a 4.5%. But if we move as a county more towards department level discretion when it comes to increases, we could do away with this completely. And if somebody's in a department for 10 years and they hit a milestone of 10 years, then it's up to that department head or row officer to find, they could find some money within their budget and give that person a larger increase. Yeah, at the expense of maybe somebody who's only been there for a year or 2.
Well, hopefully through the merit process, it's embedded.
It's embedded, thank you.
It's embedded
It's
in their
embedded in the
longevity,
process, you
because
can
they're
just eliminate
working
it
well, they're
completely.
being rewarded
Exactly.
for their work, and the longevity is just inherent in the whole thing.
Thank you. But the bottom line is, Jim, it has to be done in tandem with the union contracts. I mean, you're welcome to come over to my office. I'll show you how if you take a non-union and a union employee and they're relatively close to each other, and if we were to say today, well, this non-union person doesn't get longevity, and we hire somebody in March or April, when that union employee hits 5 years, they're going to be making significantly more than that person who was hired before them in a non-union position. So it has to be done together. I see no other equitable way to do it.
Well, I go back,
Wanted to get rid of them.
I go back to what we said earlier, we do all of this at one time. And if we do away with the longevity pay at the same time we put in this merit hire system with the ranges, then one can replace the other. And then we also have to address the negotiations with the unions next. I couldn't agree more. This certainly is something that is outlived and usefulness.
Hey, and let me ask one question.
Yeah,
All
yeah,
these
you-
people here, everybody has a job description, correct? I mean, what you do in your office and.
County code.
That's not a civilian, he's a civilian.
No, I'm just saying,
Right,
everybody, like,
right.
I wrote up a job description for my unit.
Mhm.
And you could see, I mean, plain as day, that she's wanting a lower pay to the point where she's doing 3 pages of work. You know, I mean, if you actually look at what she does a lot of stuff there.
Okay.
Just saying there, I'm sure everybody's looking at that, comparing everybody as their job description. Or no, we don't have a job description.
Well, you came in a little late. I don't know if you missed the part we were talking about, or Diane brought up. We're going to have an evaluation system for each department head, or they're going to have to come up with their own. And then they'll be able to evaluate each employee each year, and if they're worthy of a merit raise within the salary range schedule, then they can go back to the salary board for a vote. Does that answer your question?
I'm sorry, I missed.
John, you come in late too. Do you have anything as a department head that you'd like to say?
Well, you know, years ago, we used to have to fill out evaluations for that as well. I'm just a little concerned about the eliminating it because, I mean, we have a very fine board now, but what happens when you come in and you have a bias system, you know? If I ran against Dale Pinkerton in an election and I lost, am I going to suffer from that?
Well, sure.
So I mean, you do away with that. You go on the merit system. I don't know if there's room for a board to be unbiased on that. So. My second question is, how are you going to retain dedicated employees?
I don't think you can run against Dale.
No, I don't think, I'm just saying, I'm just, you know, hypothetically, if I campaigned against them or you or anybody else, the whole point of the longevity, what is to keep dedicated employees?
You bring up a good point, and I was just jesting, of course, when I said
Right,
that.
I understand.
But it does take place. I mean, life is real and those things happen.
Absolutely, absolutely. Like I said, then my other concern is everybody wants to compare to the private sector. I tell you what, you take my job out to the private sector, I'm significantly underpaid by about $100,000. So you want to compare everything, but let's compare to what a person would be paid in the private sector versus how they pay their employees, because some people are severely underpaid if you want to base it on the private sector. You know. Your job as the chairman of the board, or the CEO, you're well underpaid if you were out in the private sector.
Well, that's why you gotta have a different
We're
policy.
doing public service.
But you talk.
At what point under public service, Jim, do you want us to earn a salary? That's my point. That's my whole point. My whole point is the increases in the COLA is to maintain dedicated employees.
So we're talking about the longevity increases now.
Right.
And we're also saying that we want to put a system in place where we can replace.
As long as it's unbiased system, then.
But the system is going to be based more on the department heads and the row officers than it is on the salary board.
Right.
You're the ones that are going to make that rating, fill out the rating sheets, and then come to the salary board and say, hey.
I have some old ratings still, but from when I used to put them on Joyce.
Okay.
When we used to do that.
But if you get back to this, like if you tell a department head, your budget can't increase more than, I'm just gonna use 3%, then that includes their salary.
Right.
So then they need to decide amongst themselves, I'm gonna take the full 3%, and my salary's gonna be the highest in that department, or it should be. Guess what? That leaves less room for increases amongst the other employees. So you see what I mean? It really starts putting in some accountability to that department.
Not denying that, I'm just.
And you know what, with longevity, if somebody hit 10 years and you want to reward them, come up with it in your budget. It shouldn't just be across the board. So, as we said earlier, and as Diane correctly pointed out, it's kind of embedded in the process.
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry, Tony.
Just to reinforce the idea, if you're going to go ahead with the performance program, the longevity would work against that. It really needs to be the performance. You're going to pay people for their work on the job, not necessarily hour, days or months in the job. You need to allow for a ramping up of the criteria, the performance criteria. Allow departments time. I'm not looking at using standardized. I mean, you've got to really gear it to the job itself, and you have to allow for that to take place at time to ramp it up. And that, again, the departments had sufficient funds to give out those performance increases over and above what the county would give as a, consumer price index increase or something like that. So some people can make more than a 2%, let's say, CPI on performance. That's allowed in the budgeting process.
Carmine brings up a very good point. The longevity works against the merit increases. Because if you don't get a merit increase, well, I don't care, another year I'll get a longevity increase. So it actually would discourage people from working harder in those departments, because if we leave this in place, so we have to get rid of it.
I worked with a psychiatrist that would tell me that people will tell you about their greatest sexual fantasies before they talk to you about their income. And income and that wages is very important to employees.
We don't want to go there today.
Right.
I was gonna leave.
John, would you like to comment on that?
People don't talk about their income, yet we're bantering people's names around in salary studies. That's not right for those individuals, period.
And it is important to remember that public salaries are public knowledge, public information.
So the public knows who the names are. All you have to do is, it's all public.
All I mean is that the positions
We don't have
what
to help
they pay
them.
is public information, whereas in a private enterprise, it may not be known to all the employees what everyone sees.
Right
It's just
now,
something
it
to think
could
about.
be very subjective of where they fall in a range. It's subjective right now. You have to make a policy of, after 10 years, should they be at mid or something to that effect.
So that's all part of what you're coming up with. All right, I think we pretty much agree on all three of these items here, where we're going to go from here, and we'll have another work session just as soon as you can come up with the data that we've asked you to come up with.
Can I say one thing?
Yes.
Just real quick on the number 3 of the motion, if it's gonna stay the way it is, then that 7% needs to be 2.5%. To equal.
Yeah, combined of
Yeah, to
7%.
equal a total of 7% for 10 years.
Okay, what's not?
Of course, I always wondered why you got more in 5 years and less in 10 years. I've always been like that.
Yeah, well, that's just a misprint there. It's not going to stay.
Right, well, I didn't know if anybody else picked up on that, but I'm like, hell, I'd like to have 7% raised in 10
If
years.
you don't have a college degree, you're pretty strong
Thank
there.
you, I'm pretty darn good. Yeah, so, but the other thing is, if this doesn't, how do I say this?